I've been thinking a lot about this, but really this is a major part of my process, whether I'm doing seascapes or landscapes. There is, even though I primarily paint in my studio, however, I do go out maybe 10 to 20% of the time. I'll go out and paint outside. So once a week or every 2 weeks, I'm outside painting. Sometimes it's for several days in a row, or I'll take trips and spend the entire trip. I go down to Georgia, the coast of Georgia, every year for at least a week to paint outside all day. And I go to Maine for a week and paint up in Maine. So I do a lot of outdoor painting. But part of that process is really just, it's the physical experience of being outside and direct observation from life. I don't necessarily get perfect paintings when I'm outside. I'm sure none of you have had that experience. It's just, it's really, it can be so challenging to get everything right when you're outside. On the other hand, it's really hard to work just with photographs. But what it does for me to be outside working is kind of bring, it cements in my memory much more vividly than just taking pictures would. So you can go out and take a million pictures, but if you're standing there and trying to actually look at something and record what you're seeing, that's an entirely different level of engagement with the environment. So what I'm going to do for you today is it's kind of continuation of an experience that I had last fall, or maybe it was 2 falls ago. There's a really great nature reserve right near my house where I walk all the time, and I've done a ton of things from that area. And I was out there for my morning walk one time. It was so beautiful that I decided I was going to go home, grab my paints, and go right back out and do a painting. And it was about 8:30 in the morning by the time I got outside with my paints. And I got out, I set up, and it was this time of year, because it's one of those things on your iPhone where it says, this day 2 years ago, or whatever. You know, it's a gorgeous picture, and it reminded me of that whole experience. But what had happened was I got out there, and you know, when you're walking and you're on an exercise walk, you're plenty warm, you're comfortable. I went home, I got my gear, I go and set up. I'm standing out there for 10 minutes and I was freezing. I thought there's no way I can stand here and do a whole painting. But I got the painting started, and I'll show it to you. This was the beginning of that painting, just for proof that I was actually standing out there. But it was so cold that I only got the underpainting down, and I had to go inside.
Can you show it here?
Yeah. So I had to go inside because it was just too cold. However, I went right back home, and I took a couple of reference photos, and from these reference photos, and having just had the direct experience of being out there in this place where the colors had just really taken my breath away when I walked by, enough that I actually, of course, went right back there. So from that experience, I did one of my favorite of all time fall paintings. And I thought that had to be because of that connection of having been there and observed it. And I still really remember everything about it. And this is one of the things, if you paint a lot of photographs, I think that half of your experience that you're drawing on from any photograph has nothing to do with the visual, or the visual's only a part of the story. A lot of it is just what you remember from being there, right? It's the story attached to it. It's who you were with. It's the sounds. It's the quality of the air, the temperature. Well, maybe what it smelled like. If you're at the ocean, you could have the salt and the sea breeze. It's all of that stuff that's in your memory, sensory memory, and you can't see it. So that's why I don't like to paint from other people's photos, because you don't have that. You're kind of painting blind, or you're missing some key information. So what I would like to do today, that was a small painting. That was an 11 by 14. And I'm going to do, I've always wanted to do something larger of that, and I thought this is a perfect opportunity to do that, because it still has that excitement for me. It's the right time of year, so that's what we're doing now. I'm going to take that and do it over again. So we're going to kind of relive that, and having just experienced the freezing cold of standing out, that whole memory really fresh in my mind. This was the one we did where we were standing out in the cold just earlier today. So I will tell you, when you're composing outside, when I'm composing outside, it's kind of fun because you can really you can put the trees where you want them, you can get this nice detail. When you're a little bit more confined, when you're working from an image, because you've got those 4 edges already define for you. So what I've done for this, because I don't know about you, but I wasn't crazy about a tree cutting right through the center of this. It doesn't make a great composition. So I went back, cheated. This one's a little better because it's not quite in the very center. It's still not great. I do like the bigger gap here. But I went and looked at the original sketch here, and I had moved the tree over a little bit. And so I'm going to sort of compose from my memory as well as from the flat photograph that I have here. And I did a little bit of a thumbnail sketch here, just to, I did about 6 of them. You're seeing the last 2, just to figure out where I was going to put my trees, and I started to place my trees on here already. So just to tell you a little bit about how I work, this is a piece of Lux Archival. Generally, I work either on Lux Archival or UART. I would say I work on UART more often, UART 320 to 400. This is Lux Archival, which I also really love. And I have it mounted on a piece of Mount Core foam board, acid-free foam board, because I generally just pop things right into frames. I often do it on anything. This is a 16 by 20. I'll be using sizes that I can easily just put into the frame. So that's what I'm working on, and I'm gonna just put in my underpainting colors right now. All right, so trees are pretty dark. The whole scene, it's for a fall scene, it's a little bit cool, which I also thought was kind of interesting. If you have any questions, just feel free to ask while I'm painting. I don't mind interruptions. I can talk and paint at the same time. What color is that? This is a new pastel. And I don't know the exact color. I don't remember. But it's a dark brown? It's a dark brown. Yeah, it's a chocolate brown. Kind of a relatively warm reddish brown.
So just wanted to let you know there are 12 people watching besides me.
Hi, welcome. All right, so I just was distracted. I just said I could talk and paint at the same time. But what I ended up doing there, I was thinking, oh, big tree here. This was actually 2 smaller trees. So, oops, that's all right. Oh, because I don't really want that big tree right in the center there. So yes, I'm lifting off. That's fine. This is one of those interesting compositions where you have, it's like a stained glass effect, framework where it's these verticals going through the whole composition. Just gonna take a look at what I did there again. I can always add more trunks in later. I want to make sure these trunks are not too straight, and I want to make them kind of organic feeling, so that's why I'm not really drawing careful straight lines here. And now to fill in behind, to fill in some of the color that goes behind. So this is, I was on a path, on a rail path, and then looking down into a gully and then over at some trees on the other side. So that it gets much cooler as we move further away. So I get to use some cool greens that I don't usually get to use in a landscape. So you'll notice this is going to end up being kind of a local color underpainting, which I don't always do, but when there's so much color going on here, I think it's going to be simpler, less confusing for me to just do local colors and just put them down for the most part underneath. Just color testing now to get the right colors. One thing I like about forest scenes is they don't really involve that much drawing. It's a lot of soft edges.
Screwed up. She got
A lot of layering.
full screen. She went back a little screen again. They have a technical difficulties.
So some of you that are on Zoom, if you could just mute, hit your mute buttons, because there's a little bit of feedback going on there. Thank you. So one thing I like about this image is there's and I'm just gonna walk it forward. I don't know if I can turn this up a little bit. Let me see here. It's all the way up. I just want everybody to be able to see it a little bit more closely. Colors are a little unusual. Colors, which is why it's a little more interesting. I always like painting things that are unexpected.
Can you show everybody on Zoom?
Yeah, it was overcast. Yeah, and often you get a little bit more color, and it's more, you can actually see the colors more clearly in the fall on overcast days, because you don't have the light dark contrast of the sunlight.
I guess I would guess that was a spring scene. It's the spring green.
It's true, it does have that look to it. Because in the spring you get that early first buds have the same colors in it, yeah. All right, now we're gonna put some warmer greens in there to warm this up. This isn't even all that warm. Now, I am looking at generally, I'm trying to create a value patterns around. There's this dark area in here. I want to bring a little bit more dark in here, more solid green. There's more darks along the bottom. I'm going to use kind of a purpley brown, I think, for that. Yeah, when I'm working with a box of this size, I don't bring all of my new pastels with me, and sometimes even if I did, I wouldn't have the exact right color. So I'll just use whichever pastel I have that's the color that I want. The main reason for using the new pastels in underpainting is that you're guaranteed to not put too much pastel on there. So with the softer pastels, if I pick one up and it's softer, I just have to be sure not to press too hard because I don't want to fill the tooth in the paper. during the underpainting. I want to keep it really light because I'm just going to be toning the paper. I try not to use my Rosiers for the underpaints. If you're not familiar with them, they're about $20 a stick, so I'd rather not use those for underpainting.
Do you ever start with a dark background?
Yeah, I do. I've recently done about several still lifes, and if you on my Instagram, look at the most recent things I've been posting, and I use the black UART for those. And I will often use, if I'm going out plein air, I have some pastel matte and some mid-tones to darks. I like the wine color and the blues and the greens, and I love starting on those if it's a predominantly dark subject matter. Yeah. In that case, I don't do an underpainting at all. That is my underpainting. Okay, I don't really need to put a color in the sky because the sky, I am going to put a little bit of color, but there's no point in underpainting and washing it down because there's so little pigment in those light colored pastels that you're really just wasting the pastel to put it in the underpainting. I can get enough color on there without using anything. It's just in the alcohol wash. This is a pretty good example of how every painting sort of starts out as an abstract design. Mm-hmm. Hopefully it won't look this abstract by the time I'm done. All right, so let's get that alcohol in there. You know, I might want to just restate the dark of this tree trunk right here. So if you want, the underpainting is really a strategic thing that's supposed to help me as I layer color on top. That's the whole point of the underpainting. I'm just laying in a base layer. And I can see that I want these tree trunks to be dark enough, so I want to be sure I get enough pigment on there to start with. I don't have to have every single dark line in there right now, but I do want a certain statement on there. This one I want a little bit thicker. I probably don't want them all the same color either. It'd be more interesting if some are darker than others. So this one here looks a little bit darker. Just a little bit more depth. Okay. So we'll start with the lightest areas first. This is a watercolor brush. I did watercolor for about 10 years before I discovered pastel. At which point I started. I was teaching watercolor in my house to several people. I had started at a community school, and then my uncle sent me a box of pastels in the mail and said, just try these, I think you might like them. And I just fell in love and I stopped painting in watercolor completely, except when I was teaching the class, and I felt like I was cheating on the watercolor students. And I did, and so I finally convinced all the watercolor students to switch over with me. I just didn't want watercolor anymore. Because pastel was, for me, so much more fun and easier. I know that it's a personality thing and some people have an easier time with watercolor, but for me, pastel was just intuitive. I know we're all biased in this room towards pastel, but really, I just feel like it's very forgiving, and the color immediacy is so satisfying that there's. But what got me started on that was that I do enjoy the underpainting process, and I do treat it kind of like a watercolor. Although I don't use watercolor, I would get too confused if I were doing two different media. I had a lot of failed watercolor paintings though that I think is underpainting for pastels. They're all gone at this point, but I did do that for a while. Yeah, I did that. I have done that, and especially by putting like that pastel brown on the paper.
So your brush strokes are pretty short.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do here with the brush strokes is create this scene has a lot of texture to it, and so I'm trying to create a little bit of that implied texture even in the underpainting. So moving it around, wiggling the brush. I don't want to have a smooth flat shapes really anywhere, because that's not what this scene is. And in here, I put kind of a blue-green back here, but I know it's going to come out too blue if I just use that. So I'm just kind of dipping into the green that's already down here, and I'll mix it in as I'm painting it. So this is the area of my process, the underpainting that I have probably has altered more in the last 5 years. I'd spend more time on the underpainting, more thoughtful about it. Because the more careful, the more deliberate my underpainting, the easier the rest of the painting goes.
The alcohol.
Yeah, it does. It's very different on the pastel mat. It's who asked the question? So the pastel mat, the structure is kind of on a micro level. It's like Velcro. So when you put the pastel on it, it will really hold on to it. So it won't lift. You can't lift it up and move it around the way you can on here. You know, I can't just get it back to the paper. So once it's down there, it's very difficult to move it. You can wet it down and get it so that it's not going to mix physically with what goes on top of it. So I don't enjoy using an underpainting with pastel mat as much, which is why I like the pastel mat in the toned versions better, because then I don't do an underpainting.
If you put too much alcohol in pastel mat,
It's
have
heavy.
lift the surface.
Okay.
Ooh.
That's true with a lot of surfaces, and it happens more if you're using a 91% alcohol than 70%.
What are you using? 70?
This is 70.
Yeah, we just had that as a question from the Zoom as well. What which alcohol are you using?
Yeah,
You find it makes a difference?
It does. It does. Well, there's a couple ways. The 91% just has more alcohol. It's the alcohol to water ratio. And so when there's more alcohol, less water, it's going to evaporate very quickly, and it's a little harder. This to me is the 70%. It's a little bit easier to manage. It still disperses the color well, dissolves everything nicely, but it doesn't. It gives you time to move things around, and because it's not so strong, it's not going to dissolve the glue the way that 91%. The exception would be if you're in a very, very, very humid place. Yeah. So maybe here in August.
Yeah.
Or South Carolina.
Yeah. That's fine. Come on up and take a quick look if you want. Maybe not everybody all at once. Take your time. This takes a minute to cover.
Okay, because I don't see any comments.
I saw. I did.
I saw one thumbs up.
Yeah, that's great. But I'll so I can see this.
Okay, oh, I see.
It's a great spot. I don't want to see.
No, I will. No, I won't supposed to. I might just. It's like that's what I was gonna do.
If it gets into the alcohol itself, the color that you're painting with, like is the pastel suspended in the alcohol showing up?
This does get dirty after a while, which is why I try to start with the lightest colors. And when I'm doing a very large painting, because sometimes I'll work 20 by 60 or 30 by 60 or those, I usually have to switch the alcohol partway through because it'll just get so muddy and it almost turns into paint. But for something this size, it does, the pigment does start to sink. So as long as I'm just dipping it in and brushing it off, it's really, I can get away with it. Yeah, and then, I don't know if any of you have watched me do the spray using a toothbrush, the spray on waves, where you have to dip a toothbrush into the alcohol. That comes to the very end of the painting process, where I take a toothbrush, dip it into the alcohol, get it wet, and then scrub it on a wet, white pastel, thank you. And then splash it onto the painting. I do that at the end, and by the end, and the alcohol's just been sitting there, all of the pigment has dropped to the bottom, and as long as I'm not stirring it up, I can use that same alcohol. Yeah. So there, I see some little drips coming down because the alcohol was pretty juicy that I was putting on in here. That's totally fine with me for a painting like this, to have that kind of different textural interest in the background. Because it really works pretty well for woods. There are going to be various vertical textures. It doesn't work when I'm doing my waves because there's really no vertical lines in the waves. So I really have to be careful with the way I'm doing my wave that I don't get drips like that. But here it works with my subject. So this is why I can do local color, but I'm not too worried about the painting becoming too flat because I'm going to be layering a lot of other colors on top of what I have here. There's a lot of lights. There's kind of the open field that's about a quarter of the way up from the bottom of the page is a lighter value. So I want to be sure as this goes in right here, I've got it nice and light right in here, but I want to make sure that value works all the way across, because really one of the main functions of the underpainting is to set my values. Let's get our trees in now that we've got all the lights pretty much handled. This is a 1-inch black brush. It's a Princeton art brush. It's pretty soft. Yeah. You know, so a lot of people say they don't want to use good watercolor brushes on pastel pages. I've had this brush for maybe 15 years, and it's exactly as good as it was when it first started. I think it has to do with how you're using the brush, because I have other brushes here. Let's see if I could find the one. This one used to be about that long. It's a good stiff brush, and I used it for removing things. So if you're using it to take stuff off and you're using it to abrade the surface, it's going to also take apart the brush. But I'm just using this to paint with, and it has not done anything. So if you have alcohol or nice watercolor brushes and you're afraid of ruining them, I would just use them, because I find them really, it's better to use good brushes. Don't call me if you ruin a brush, though. Maybe you don't use your brushes the way I do, so. I'm deliberately varying the pressure as I go down in the angle so that they don't feel like I'm drawing straight lines.
Are you choosing to leave out the horizontal?
Yeah.
What was the question?
She asked if I was choosing to leave out the horizontal branch, this branch. I may put something in, but I feel like that's too distracting. I want to have some horizontals, but that one, part of it is the way it's kind of making a plus sign in the middle of that is really funny. So, and I tried it on my thumbnail and I couldn't get it to work in a way that I liked it. So I'm staying away from it for now. I will probably have some branches that go across, but not that long. It's a weird looking branch. You know, it's like the tree grew long. You know, it sort of fell over, but didn't fall over all the way, or something. It's bent at the bottom of it. So it's one of those things that looks okay in a photograph, but I don't know if I can make it work in a painting.
One of the things you said yesterday, composition too, is that you don't want a hard line taking you to the exact corner of the frame.
Right.
And that one does.
That one does. So if I was trying to put it in so that it wasn't going right to the corner, but it's hard. It was hard to get that to work either. So yes, I would have to change where it was coming down to that effect.
But if you look at the photograph, it's hard to see something else.
Yeah,
It really is reflective.
it does. Exactly. It's
Yeah.
very distracting.
Yeah.
And that's not really what I want you to notice.
Exactly.
Right. So it's a good question. Yeah. I really like to use my photo as a jumping off point instead of as, you know, really just working exactly from the photo. It's hard to do that though. It's much easier to just keep going back and see if it helps. Because then you're kind of more on your own and you're having to make a lot more decisions when you're jumping off.
That's my job.
Yeah. Damn it. Yes, it is. Okay.
It looks like a watercolor.
Right. Well, it kind of is at this point. Water, it's all pigment, and it's how you apply the pigment at this point. The way I apply the pigment is much more close to watercolor than it is to dry. Now it's a wet, and it's a wet wash using these pigments, not dissolve them. So it is a watercolor, yeah. Alcohol color. All right, so we're gonna let this dry a little bit. It's still wet, still a little bit wet, so we're working on letting that dry. While it's, what I try to do is look away from it for a few minutes because to look back at it with fresh eye. It's really hard to do that when you're doing a demo. So you end up looking at it too closely. But my next step would be to maybe draw in a few more branches that I want to be there and correct the drawing because it's set up. If you want to take a picture while I'm letting it dry, that would be just a good time to do that. So I'm just looking to see, because I do need to sort of compose on the fly a little bit. It is going to need some cross branches. It's going to be. Thank you. Yeah. There's strategy. Yeah. Strategic. Further away. Yeah. Right. Masses right now. Soft edges. I like to keep the edges soft at this stage, because then you can choose what to harden. I do like some of these, there's diagonals that go across the top. Really nice. It makes a big difference to do that.
I can see right over you. Not no, you weren't.
By the way, we're recording this, and Jeanne has given us permission to put it on our YouTube channel, so we can go back and study it and ask ourselves the questions we wish we answered. It'll give us a few days, though.
Okay, so I just added a little bit of extra clutter to kind of relate those major lines to each other.
Now you're done with your underpainting.
What's that?
You're done with your underpainting.
I'm done with the underpainting, yes. I'm done with the underpainting. I was just waiting for the underpainting to dry a little bit more.
So there's never a point where you go ahead and put more alcohol on it?
There is never, there would be no, I put under alcohol on the whole thing. And I don't wet it down a second time.
Or even like a section of it?
So the only reason I would ever wet down a section of it a second time would be if I made a really bad miscalculation about how dark something needed to get. Okay. If something was not dark enough, like a big area, and I thought, oh, it's going to be really hard to get to put darks or to put lights on top of this area, I might do a section over to correct and make it a little darker. The thing that you have to consider, though, before you underpaint a second time is every time you wet the paper, you're testing the integrity of that sanded paper a little bit. So wetting it once, it's not made to be wet over and over again. It's not watercolor paper. If it's got sanded stuff on it, it could start to be hard to, you could destroy the integrity of the paper. You could really mess it up. So it comes at a cost, and you definitely wouldn't want to do it more than twice. But sometimes it's really worth it if you need a rich dark and it's nowhere near dark enough. The other option would be to put lots and lots of dark color on there, and then it's hard to put something on top of that. So yeah. But normally I don't do that.
Okay.
And actually, if you make that mistake once or twice, then you start being more accurate in the darks the first time. So, ideally, So that, I just made a mark here and I made that more wiggly because I was really looking, at this point I'm correcting, and trees tend to have quirky little things, especially the skinny ones have quirky little things. And if you spend a lot of time observing in a forest, you've got trees, the skinny ones that have just started up, and then you've got the big, thick ones. But they all have something quirky about them. They're not going to be perfectly straight. You're not painting lots. So now you're not going to have just perfectly straight cylinders. And we tend to make things less random and more neat and orderly. And so you have to really actively try to make things random when you're painting out natural stuff. All right, so now I've kind of got the whole screen going here, and I work when I start the actual painting, I work from the back forward. I work from what's farthest away to what's closest up front, because especially with pastel, it's such a tactile, three-dimensional medium. I want to layer one thing on top of the next. So let's start with what's back in the back, and that would be, I want to put something into the sky, because it's hard to tuck the sky around other things. So I want to at least get a base color in there. And we talked about how it's sort of overcast. The light looks to me to be almost a little bit lavender, pink or lavender. So I'm probably going to use those tones and just block a little bit in. Okay, that looks very pink or very lavender. So I'm gonna just lighten that up. Oh, this is much better. Kind of very light blue. But it's a sort of a purpley blue, light lavender blue. So these are whites. I have at home, I have a box of 30 whites by Terry Ludwig, and then I have the 12 whites from Diane Townsend. And I remember when Terry Ludwig came out with the 30 whites, and I thought, who would ever need 30 whites? I've ordered them at least twice, because I've gone through them, because I paint waves and the seas, you know, and there really are differences in whites. And it really, for me anyway, it's really important to have all the different whites. So. And I'm sitting here thinking, what made me think of it is I only have like 5 whites in there. I can't do anything. I have 5 whites. So if you ever need an excuse to just buy more pastels, you know, just call me. If you've gone on my Instagram, there's a little link at the very top. There's to the picture of my studio, and I have 7 IKEA dinner trays full of pastels, and each tray is a different color with an array from light to dark. And at home, that's what I have to work with. So I'm roughing it when I'm not at home.
I love those trays.
Yeah, they're great. It's the Clack dinner trays from IKEA. K-L-A-C-K. They're not expensive. They're like $10 or something. I just put a piece of bone in the bottom of them. All right, so now that I've got just a little bit of the value of the sky locked in there, I might add, just make it a little, I'm going to glaze over. It seems just a little too white to me. I'm just glazing a little bit of pink over, especially at the edges where it's meeting up with the trees. But I need a little bit of a framework. I wanted to start. Okay, see, I'm ready to get into those pinks and corals, but I have to remind myself I'm working from back forward. So we're going to go with what's in the back room of trees first before we get to that. And what I was going to say is I have to get the framework, a little bit of framework of tree down before I put these tree leaves in the front screen down. But we don't need to worry about that yet because we're going to do this back line of trees. Now, since these are in the background, they really can stay very soft. I don't need to get into detail, not as if I've gotten into detail anywhere yet, but they can stay very, very soft. They're very light in value back there. They don't want to draw the eye. They have to stay back. So what I'm most interested in is it can't be a straight across line. Gotta have an interesting horizon there. I want it to kind of be real soft at the horizon's edge, so this is a good color for that, but it's gotta get darker pretty quickly. That's a little bluer than we need it to be. I just want to blend this in, so I'm going to just drag my palm across to soften those colors in. I'm going to put a little bit more of that bluish color across this. I want them to go back in space. A little bit of the light. Some more sky up there. Confused about where, so I'm not looking at the same reference. There we go. That's better. So for those of you who were in the workshop with me, several people at the beginning stages of their paintings, I would come up to them and they'd say, "This looks like a first grader's painting." This is at this stage, paintings all look kind of messy and blobby. And to me, one of the things, having done hundreds and hundreds and thousands of paintings at this point, you just get used to the cycle of there's a certain stage that paintings go through lots of stages, and you're patient with painting and with yourself, and you do not turn on that judging voice that says, "What does that look like at this point?" You know that you have high hopes for this painting in the future, and it has to go through these stages to get to that point. So don't be critical about it in your own mind while you're in the middle of developing those things. So you can't look at it as if it's a finished product and judging it at the same time you're painting. The judgment is an enemy of the creativity. There's a lot of creativity, I would imagine you would agree, is to play. You need to be able to play and experiment. And if you're worried about making a mistake, you can't do that. Oh, I like that color on top of there. That's nice. So I'm doing the background. I want to fill in, just solidify the sky behind here, just because, so that we can put things in front. Now, notice I'm losing some of these trees, but that's fine. They can always be brought back. Brush off if I need. But if I want to establish darks in there, it's easy enough to do that on top of clean. In pastel, I know right where these darks go. Yep, this is that brush that I'm going to have to replace soon because it doesn't have very many bristles. It's almost gone. It also works as a drawing tool. You know, you can put in just where you're going to put a branch just by brushing pastel off.
You have a particular brand of pastels that you find works best for different parts of painting?
It's true. You know, it's an interesting question because sometimes I'm thinking I would love to have a Giraud in a particular color and it's just the right size and shape and texture at a particular point, but I don't necessarily have that. And then although it is nice to have a particular shape sometimes or a particular texture. And every one, the more you work with them, you get to know the different qualities. So the Terry Ludwigs are kind of creamy and super soft, and they have a great shape because you've got these edges that are nice and sharp on all the sides. And you can use the points, so you can make details with them, but you can also do big juicy strokes. So they're very versatile. However, they're so soft that they're not really good for blending colors together on top of doing glazing because they're a little bit. They release too much pigment of themselves every time. You have to have a really light touch to get subtle color overlays. So sometimes one that I like a lot for being able to do a lot of different things with the Rosiers, which are the really expensive ones, because those are very easy to control. They have a lot of pumice in them. They will not give you a nice, clean, smooth stroke. They will give you kind of a bumpy texture because they have so much pumice, but they're really, really strong in pigment. And they're great for little details. So each one has a different, so I can't say I have a favorite one. It just depends on the situation. If I had to pick, say, 4 different brands that I would take with me on a desert island, it would be the Terry Ludwigs, the Diane Townsends, the Giraud, and the Rosier. Those are my favorites. But I use all of them. I also, the new pastels and the Rembrandts, I couldn't do without those either. Yeah.
It's close.
It's kind of different. Like, I'm actually leaving a box of pastels here in Maryland because I don't ever want to have to. I don't want to have to bring them down every time. Have some here. I don't know if my daughter heard me because she's chatting with my brother over there, but she doesn't know I'm leaving a full set and an adult here forever in the basement.
Well, you need a place to stay for Rosier.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Oh, they're gonna be safe with you, huh? I don't know. I think they might be safer at my daughter's house.
Where did you parcel them out? Oh, there you go.
So now I've got the background in there, and I'm getting ready to start moving forward into some of the other top edges. I want to do. I'm ready to do kind of all basically the way far background. I should probably drop down and do this little mid background here, and then I get to do the fun stuff. It does help to have a little bit of a procedure that I tend to go through, because then when I do get distracted and want to work on different areas, and this way it kind of brings me back into, okay, that's right, I have to do this first.
Yeah.
So I have to say, I really do like, I'm looking down at my palette down here on the paper towels. And once I've pulled out once I've got all the colors that I don't usually pull them out ahead of time. I had a little time and I pulled a few that I thought would be useful, but I just start to work with these. I try, once I have the ones that I like, I try not to look too much more in my box. I just work with what I have to keep the palette for the painting unified. That's a Rosier. That's the pumice. Yeah.
They must be similar to Diane Townsend.
So they are similar in texture. They have more pumice and they're a little harder. And they're a little bit, I would say, a little stronger in the power of the pigments. Yes. So I make my own all the time. And if I also have on my website, I have a blog that I very frequently add to these. And I used to do it more frequently. The last one I put up there was about a year ago. But one of the blog posts is on how to make your own pastels. So it's kind of a step-by-step thing, but I do it all the time. I just, whenever pieces get small or they shatter, I break them, I have a box in my studio that I just collect them. And then once the box gets full, I take them downstairs and I sort them by color and I smash them down and add a little water and do this. So I don't know. It's already in there. All the binder's already in there. You don't have to add anything. And so there is, some of them end up with some pumice in them because some of the ones that I've already worked with have.
Do you keep the rochers? Do you keep the rochers separate so you make more little rochers?
No, I don't do that. I just put them in with everything else. And I use the rocher. I actually bought a whole lot of rochers one year. There was a sale on the Maison de Pastel website. They had a whole box, like a box of 640, and they were their tester colors that they were using to make the sample, the sheets of all of the colors or something, that, you know, the catalog, color catalog. So they were all slightly used, and they were selling the whole box for 40% off. So I ordered that.
Wait a minute, only 10,000 euros.
I mean, you're not far off. Right.
I think when I was there last year, they said you could buy everything in the store for like 34 million euros.
Oh my.
Or something like that. Or maybe it was 34,000, but it may as well have been million. You know, just for the hues. It's really.
All right. So there's a lot of kind of pinks and oranges I want to get some warmth into this ground too. A little bit more peach. It was misty and foggy that morning, which is why it looks like this, but also why it was cold. I like just the addition of this. This is a Rembrandt, but scraping the Rembrandt over the Rocher where the pumice is already on there. It's a nice way to, the pumice grabs this texture a little bit more, creates it and allows you to add more. So I'm really, in a way, this is almost like an underpainting because I'm still just kind of building up screens that I'm going to be gradually putting a few more details on top of. Now let's just look at the bottom because I want this to, I don't really want to define ground here, and the trunks actually are below the picture plane. but there's a little bit of a suggestion of earth down there. It needs to go darker down here just to ground the whole composition. That's a great color. I like that color a lot. This is a Giraud. Giraud makes really nice, subtle, neutral reds. So whenever I pick up a color, a new one that I like what it's doing, I look for where else can I use it. Good in some of the dark areas elsewhere in the paint, just adding little bits of that color. All right, now I'm just going to step back for a minute. I think I need a little bit more white. So if you don't see, I do sometimes blend more with my fingers, depending on the subject matter. If I'm doing a seascape, I tend to blend more because I want the water needs to be smoother. Any of you who have watched any of those Tiffany videos see me blend with my fingers a lot. For something like this, it's all about getting that texture and that kind of the variability on there. So I'm not doing much blending. They would be much worse if they did not. All right. So, next step. Once again, I'm going to need to find some dark. So as we all know, your photos are not really that accurate in terms of color and value, so I don't really want to make the trees as dark as they appear in the photograph.
They look almost black.
Yeah.
And it's a little distressing with a little stained glass. Like
Yes, exactly. So, and they're not all going to be the same. So they don't need to be super dark. As a rule of thumb, generally the ones that are the values, trees that are closer to us are going to be as dark as they are. The dark values that are close to us will look lighter further away because the atmosphere will interfere with what we see. So in this tree, there's another one that's exactly the same thickness and same kind of tree, but if it's 30 yards away, it's going to appear a lot later, or it should. It may not in the photograph, but it should in reality. In this case, most of these trees are actually really pretty close, but I still want to vary the values a little bit so they don't all look like they're in one line. All right, let's get some greens in there now. Now that I'm ready to put in some of the leaves at the top, I realize what I need to do next is get the framework of some of these branches. So I'm going in with vine charcoal. Because the vine charcoal is ideal for sketching, and it's a lighter value, it's non-committal. It can stay in the painting, but I can go over it. So to put in, there's this nice sort of soft branch that goes up there. I barely touched it. I just want to know where it disappeared into that. And it's, in this case, it's okay that there are branches coming off the side, because this is clearly a forest and there's gonna be branches coming from everywhere. You know, you don't want to paint a landscape and have branches coming in from the side of the painting, because that's clearly one of those, you painted this from the photo, there's just branches hanging in from the side, but here, this is a forest and this is just part of the scene. There's going to be branches going every direction. Yes, this is vine charcoal or willow charcoal, so there's really no pigment in it. That's the nice thing about vine. It's a great thing for sketching too, because since there's no pigment in it, it's not going to mess up the other colors. It doesn't. It'll disappear if you put something over it. So I have, the reason I wanted to put those branches on is if I start putting on leaves, I want to have a structure of what are those leaves kind of hanging from. Even if you can't always see all the little branches, or all the little connections between the leaves and the branches, but it just helps me to know where to arrange them. So I want a little bit. So I've got these, I like this little bit of loose green up here. Try to keep, for leaves, I really try to keep my strokes as large and nondescript as possible. And then at the end, place in some more detailed strokes. But I really try not to get down to the tiny little details till the end. And I think I can leave just some of the underpainting showing through. So I'm getting tempted to do pure foreground stuff. This is the most fun, but I'm realizing now it's time to put in some of the colors that are in the back. Well, I have time to do that. So there is one that's in trees in the back. Sure, I get that in there. And it's not just this color. Let's try this one. Let's go with something a little bit more reddish. Yep. Yeah, they're kind of the green leaves that I put in are kind of the warm, I'm going for like that green. So the middle warm green. No, it's probably going to be mostly it's like this. So we'll see. Stay tuned. No. Right, because what I'm doing is putting in what I see. And it's not like there's a lot of dark there. No, my rule is this is layers and screens of color, and I started in the back. As opposed to dark. I mean, I do that some as well, but in each area, I did start with this over here, but really, in this case, it's more important to just be working with screens. And I'm putting things in. By the way, I don't have exactly the right color that I want there, so I'm having to approximate it by using. This is more red than I need. So just layering a few things together to get where I'm going. So a lot of those rules, like going dark to light, they're helpful as long as they're helpful. And then they're not going to work in every situation. The reason they tend to be really helpful in a landscape is because they are usually behind and underneath the other colors. So you want to put them on first because the other colors are going to go on top. This is an exception to that. You're afraid what? Yeah, I'm not afraid of it. It's not going to. Because I've already done my underpainting and basically established the value areas. So there's not a big value problem in this area. I do love that color in there now. That's really nice. And I'm going to use some same thing over here. This is going to build up. This red is too strong as it is, but it's really kind of interesting. You don't have to follow and copy your photos, of course. So if this works for me, why not? Zoomed in, it doesn't help. That's the dangerous thing about the iPad. Forget that you zoomed in. So this is one of the things that I particularly love about pastel is so these colors that I'm working on right now, this tree over here, you just zoom in and look at this color. This is not one solid color. There's pink and there's orange. There's such a nice glow, the yellow and peach and orange and pink. And it's so much, to me, it's easier to create that by layering colors that visually mix with each other than it would be.
Could you show us over here?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so this is
A little more to your right.
This is this
Yeah,
pinkish
that's really
orange
good.
tree
Yeah.
is there's so many colors in there and it's kind of ideal. This sort of scene is kind of ideal to be painting in pastel because it's just perfect for visual mixing. Yeah, there is that, especially in the tree trunks, and the difference added to the tree trunks. Okay. It's easier to do that with photograph. Yeah, sorry for the You can't zoom in, right? You cannot zoom in plain arrows. You can walk over to things, but. Better exercise. Zooming in does not burn any calories. The thing about zooming in though is you really start to lose perspective. I try not to leave it there for too long because then you forget the big picture and you can get caught up in the details. Now I'm looking for other places where I see these colors to be sure I can place them elsewhere in the piece. This is the best one. So what I was noticing there is there's some peaks in the distance and then there's peaks in the foreground. And I was putting them both in the same place. It was turning into a big pink peach ball right in the center. And so I needed to correct that. So I'm just using a dry brush to get in there, and I'm going to go in with some greens to break that up a little bit. It's a flat, like 1/4-inch flat watercolor brush, and it's soft, but it doesn't really have to be stiff to brush off a little bit of pastel. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to draw that across there just because it's there. It's really. So let's get some other branches that can come up. So a little bit more actual greenery on that side will help things kind of come together. Mid-tone green. So I'm just gradually introducing new color notes in here. I want to keep the warms kind of low key, but there's still some warm colors, just a little bit. Some ochres up here. And I'm going to go back to putting in those greens. I need some stronger branches here. It's just a few darks to kind of offset what's going on over there. What I find kind of fun and satisfying about this kind of a painting is it is really, it's sort of like doing a seascape plein air, because you can kind of grab what you want from the scene. And no one's gonna be there and say, actually, that's not what, that branch wasn't there, that branch wasn't there. So you really can orchestrate it and compose it as you go along, based on, kind of little by little, based on what appeals. You can take things out or put things in. And respond to the painting. Wow, I have to say, this is a very cohesive community here. I have never had to compete for attention like this before with any demo.
We
So,
don't see each other enough.
I guess not. Maybe you should consider 6 annual meetings instead of 4.
Oh, goody.
Thank you. Oh no.
Let me see.
So when I did step back and broke away from this, I realized I wanted to put in a few more trunks and have a little bit more laciness in my, I had this major structure, but it seemed like there were too few trunks in the front. I wanted just a little bit more messiness going on in this foreground area, so that the laciness would have something to hang on. So I've added more sticks. They're going to need to connect. Some of them will need to connect to each other a little more, because I've kind of put them in haphazardly, and I want to be sure they all have something coming off of them. And so towards the end, what I will do is, so there's really some beautiful little lacy branches that are coming down. And just, so I've got, at this point, large trunks, small trunks, and major branches in here, but I don't have any of the smaller ones. And it's not that I don't want to get super, super detailed with those, but I do want to have enough of the structure so that, because really this is about layers, patterns, textures, and part of that is not just the design of all of the leaves, but also the branches. They're really important. And so those little tiny, the way the little tiny branches reach out are an important part of that textural pattern. So I do want to put in a few of those. And I'm actually going to use my trusty General's charcoal pencil, because they're skinny little branches. And it's the easiest tool for the job. So we're just going to go in and if you could see, I'm not pressing down hard. I'm not gripping this hard. I'm sort of dragging it and lightly wiggling it as I drag it, so that it's not creating lines that are too straight. And I don't want to do too many of them. Just creating little patterns. It's always interesting when you start painting woods. You don't even notice the little branches at first. And then towards the end, as you put them in, they really start to bring everything to life. Add the little tiny sticks and branches. They kind of give things the dimension, because it's that scale, that sense of scale that the painting needs. If it were a sunny day, one thing that you notice all the time in the sun with these kinds of little branches is some of them are going to be white because they're hit by the sun. And often the ones that are hit by the sun will be repeating in the same angles. So the ones that are in a particular direction are one color, and ones in a particular other direction are another color. These are all pretty dark because of the overcast lighting. So that's one thing that I do towards the end. I tend to really slow down what I'm doing towards the end. This has come together for a lot, but considering how much is going on in this painting, the colors have gone on fairly quickly. This has come together pretty say. There's a big area in here where I'd like to get this whole area right in this section, which has the same kind of overlay of visual of the greens and peaches. Is very similar to what's going on over here in different colors. And I'd like to get that sense of light and glow in the greens behind these trees. So I'm just going to put a little bit of that in here. And I'm starting, Debbie was asking if I was worried about putting this color in and we were going to add to it. These colors, or this little patch of leaves here, all of these colors are fairly close in value, similar to what's going on over here with the peaches. So I'm starting with one color which predominates all along this section. Next, the top and the bottom here too, which I think is important. That just doing that makes me feel better. Put a little pink in that too. Up here. So now, in addition to that color, I want to go with sort of a brighter green. There's definitely some light coming through. This might be too, this is really kind of more neon, but I really do like that little sense of light. So I'm going to stick a little bit of it in there, and then maybe we can tone it back down. Since we are dealing with a limited palette here, I don't have my whole tray of greens. And believe me, even if I do, I still don't always have the right color green. That's a nice green. There's just a lighter value. I mean, one thing that I love about pastel is just watching how the color combinations react with each other. Finding a color that's going to work. And I think I used to paint in oil as well as watercolor. I didn't discover pastel till I was in my 30s. And that's the problem that I had with oil was I knew what color I wanted. Most of the time I had an idea in my head, but then I had to take the time to stop and mix it. And with pastel, I could just see it and grab it. Or I would see two colors and I could layer them and put them together. So it felt more intuitive that you can actually get to what you want more quickly. And I got much more mud and oil because I was in such a hurry to mix the colors that I would never wash my brushes out well enough to clean. So this just works better for me because there's no brushes involved. So it's starting to have the feeling that I want it to have. We should talk for a minute just about focal point in something like this. Do you need a focal point? What's your focal point? How does that work at painting where you've got all this texture and all this color? And I have this question, this issue a lot with seascapes too, because there's a lot going on. And sometimes you have the top of the wave and it's easy to see where there's a focal point. Other times it's about all the activity that's going on and there's just everything everywhere all at once. And I like both kinds of paintings. And I think it's okay to not have one specific focal point. And a piece like this can work really well. You have to be aware of where your eye is going, how the composition is leading you around the painting. And the main ingredient for a successful composition is one that keeps you engaged. And so your composition, by using color and texture and edge to keep your eye moving around and interested, that's going to make it successful. And focal point is one of the things that will keep you engaged and give you a good composition. What I want to be sure of as I'm looking through and trying to figure out where do I need to define and refine is, are there any places where my eye is going and expecting something, expecting some definition that sort of leads me to a spot? If it's leading me to a spot, I either need to get rid of that. If there's nothing there and there shouldn't be anything there, I have to change the lead and get rid of it. Or I have to put something there would define, give that little reward, as you might say, to that area. Right now I'm seeing it right here, that's too flat. And that needs to have something more going on in there. So that's I'm at that stage where I'm kind of looking and seeing where do I need more, just a little bit more detail and definition, because the focal point is always where there's harder edges, brighter lines, something more of an interest for the eye to see, notice. That's going to, in this case, it's going to mean some leaves, some edges, a little bit of definition. Maybe the contrast between the peach behind and the greens in front. It's just a good thing to ask yourself when you get towards the end is, do I have any flat areas where I should have interest? Do any of you have someone at home who tends to give you commentary on your work? Because I find it can be really useful. You may not know, it may always be welcome, but it can be helpful to direct the commentary and just say, so what is drawing your eye? You know, what if you're looking for, rather not do you like it, do you not like it, but where is your eye going? What is there anything that's distracting you, or what is this making you look at? You know, that can be a really, because even somebody who doesn't know at all what they're talking about can tell you where their eye is going. And if it's something that you don't want them to be looking at, you know that you need to fix it. I don't mean that as a criticism. You were very good. My daughter is really has improved a million of my paintings. She's been really good. Seriously though, she does my calendar, and you get my calendar, which we have to still work on. I know. I trust her opinion implicitly. I think the nice thing about having your children around is they don't really care about your feelings and nothing really want it. Not everybody will. Remember being at the beach one time, painting at the beach, and the kids were sitting behind me. And my son pipes up, well, that's one for the factory second pile. I mean, he wasn't wrong. All right, so now another little spot right here, that's just a little mushy. I'm just gonna put in a couple of So this lighter pale green, I'm noticing that when some of these ones in the foreground have light hitting them, the sky hitting them, there's this cool light on some of the leaves. So it's a nice way to get a little bit more dimension into my foreground leaves just by little hits of this pale bluish green. So just putting a little bit of that in there. And I don't think I want to do too much more here. Maybe just down in here, I'm going to add a couple more strokes with that. A little bit of an area of field. There's growth down here. So it looks like a very complex scene, but it's not labored over. And, so I hope that this gives you some sense of adventure, trying something that looks complicated. It doesn't have to be complicated. Start in the back and move forward. That's it for that. Yeah.
Something you said earlier.
Yeah.
You talked about branches coming in from the side.
Yeah.
And how it indicated that you're working from a photograph.
Right. You want to know what I meant?
Yeah, because I've stayed outside for 20 years, and sometimes I think for all these branches coming in, and that's how I feel. That's the format I've chosen, is to bring the eye. So I wasn't sure what you meant about the.
So generally, lots of times people will take a picture, and in the picture, you're standing there, and there might be a tree over to the side, and so in the top corner, there's some weeds coming in, and often people will paint their painting based on exactly whatever the camera captured, and so they're sure enough those branches will be in there, and generally, if you were standing there, you would see the stuff that you really wanted to paint in the distance, and you would ignore those branches overhead because you wouldn't pay attention. They wouldn't be what you were interested in, and they wouldn't necessarily, even if you held it up, they wouldn't necessarily help your composition. So unless it's helping your composition, if you have a reason for putting it in, but often something that's coming in from the side is going to pull your attention over there, and if it's not attached to anything, it can make you think, why am I missing the rest of it? You know, it's coming up, where's the rest of that coming from? In this case, it's not really an issue because this is a whole forest, and it's sort of implied that you're in the middle of all sorts of branches all around you. So there's not a question, it's not gonna distract you and make you think that. But if you were just out in the field and you had branches coming in from one side, it makes the viewer curious about the rest of the tree or the rest of the thing. Side of it. So it can be risky to do that. It can be hard to handle that one.